Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Steve LaFrancois, Chief Technology Officer, Public Sector, Verizon, and Craig Bowman, Vice President, Advanced Solutions Division at Verizon. Well, I'm just going to jump right in here, gentlemen. You know, pick up newspaper and you see all kinds of news about this thing called 5G. So what the heck is 5G?
Yeah, it's fundamentally a different technology that's getting deployed that's really built around business, not built around consumer consumption of bandwidth for surfing the internet. It's really about improving performance of the enterprise space. So think about being able to do things that you can't do today. So it might be not just wearing body cameras, but interacting with augmented reality for public safety personnel, being able to not only see people, but also identify and communicate back with their infrastructure in a much more rapid fashion.
So, Craig, is this just a faster 4G, or what exactly is it?
Well, let's take a look at what's happening in the marketplace. So if you go to a football game today and you look around, everybody is watching the game that's in front of them on their phones.
That's right.
Which is just a crazy change in what's happening in the industry. So that demand for video, the demand for different capabilities is driving the necessity for us to build a different kind of network. And thank goodness that 5G came out, because it's not just a question of more bandwidth. It's also a question of being able to reduce the latency on the network. And that's what the technology is really providing, so that we can actually, as Steve said, take advantage of things we were never able to do before, because it just wasn't available. The bandwidth wasn't available.
So, Steve, let's go from the football field to the federal agency.
Right.
So what does this mean for our listeners?
Yeah, you have to start looking at the network not just as a transport mechanism, but also about the intelligence that the network provides. So when we start talking about the spectrum and all the things that 5G brings, it's also about putting computing closer to the users. So you may hear the term intelligent edge. 5G coupled with intelligent edge, and also coupling that with artificial intelligence and machine learning, is now you, from an enterprise perspective, you can drive that compute closer to your users and pull it away from your large data centers and delayer and de-risk some of the complexity within agencies' data centers.
Yeah, and it's funny that, Steve, you say that, because if we look back through history, we've gone from mainframes to co-location to cloud. And in each one of those transitions, we've been moving the data together. We've been centralizing the data. And now what's happening is we're reversing it. It's actually going back out. We're pushing our data back out to the edge. And you'll see, or you'll hear the term multi-access edge computing. And the reason for that, and people debate whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing, it's a necessary thing. Because think of autonomous vehicles. You simply cannot call the cloud, compute, and get back the amount of calculations that have to happen on an autonomous vehicle without having the compute right there at the vehicle. Another reason why 5G and reduced latency is so critical for the future of our networks.
So, Steve, I want to tie into this concept of the future. If you go to Google, type in how many IoT devices will there be in 2020, Google will tell you like 5 times as many people are out there. And so how is this going to impact the federal network?
Yeah, so what you really have to do from an agency perspective is start to prepare for the volume of additional information that you're going to see across your enterprise. And which really, when you start talking about readiness, it's about readiness with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and how do you apply it into your mission space. All of those things have to be looked at now, so that you can improve and keep up with the availability of information and be able to do real-time processing to support the mission effectively.
So, Craig, we got a lot of IoT devices. We got this 5G coming. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for trusting who transports the data? I mean, that's really important for federal agencies, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that, tying on to him before I get to that question, hashtag standing still is not an option. It's just not. If we are, and my background is I came working with the Department of Defense. I know it's very challenging for federal agencies because you have a limited budget. You've got to maintain what you have, and meanwhile you've got to take into account all the stuff that's happening, both from the number of devices that are being attached to the network as well as the security integration. But if we simply maintain what we have, the network that we have in this country is changing so rapidly that the agencies will be left behind, and we don't want that to happen. So we've got to figure out a way to integrate security in the future of our network, and we've got to modernize in the things that we do within the budgets that we have. if we're going to be successful going forward, because standing still is not an option.
I want to talk, Steve, about this amount of data on the network. So we have 5G out there. We have this concept called millimeter spectrum and a lot of things going on at the edge. You mentioned the edge earlier. So does this reduce the amount of data on the network, or can it, or does it increase it?
No, it potentially does significantly decrease the amount of data that needs to get transported across the enterprise space. And so as you drive more processing and more analytics closer to your users, you have that layer of intelligence, which is doing a lot of data reduction so that you can lower the complexity of the information that you need to bring back to your processing within an agency's data center.
Craig, when you talk about massive amounts of data, this is another aspect of 5G that it allows massive amounts of data to go from point to point, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So one of the, and Steve's been kind of hinting to it, and it's been all over the news, that Verizon has embarked on this its own massive network integration, modernization, migration to the 5G and our fiber backbone. It was in the news that we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into glass from Corning to make this upgrade. It's a necessity. And so in that is not just about adding more pipes, it's about being smart with the network itself. So Steve called it the intelligent edge network. And that is a fundamental shift in the way in which the architecture is being built so that autonomous decisions can be made to move data where it needs to go when it needs to be moved.
Steve, tell me more about this millimeter segment, please.
Yeah, so millimeter wave spectrum is really the enabler for 5G from a frequency spectrum perspective. It allows you to do things, again, that you can't do in the 4G space because it gives you massive amounts of bandwidth, orders of magnitude increase. But you also have the ability to be granular in what you have access to. So you can also enhance the security by doing some 5G spectrum slicing. So if you have a particular application that for an IoT device and you want to have that as a higher class of service on a particular spectrum, you can do that with 5G slicing.
I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on Get Closer to the Mission, Unlocking the Power of the Network, sponsored by Verizon on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.